record. And I'm going to put the chat open as well if people have any questions. Right, I have that ready. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can do it. You see it?
We can do it.
Sure can.
All right, perfect. All right, guys, we'll go ahead and start. So thank you. Oops, I think the presenter notes are inverted here. Let me see how I can switch monitors here. Ooh. There we go. All right, so welcome to another webinar that we've been doing. We've kind of been on this initiative of creating lots of webinars to kind of expose all the things that we're doing at Ortus. This one's based on ORM and what we call slaying the ORM Dragons. All right, so to start, before we get into cborm and what cborm is, I think we need to go a little bit into what is an ORM, the problems it solves, the benefit it brings, and some of the issues that we have seen in ColdFusion, especially dealing with ORM. So ORM stands for Object Relational Mapper. It is basically a persistence framework. It will map objects to tables, properties to columns, relationships to foreign keys and foreign tables, and it just provides an easier way to persist data instead of the traditional and kind of the boring CRUD SQL. So it focuses on objects instead of data, and that's a huge, huge difference that if you're coming from a world where you only dealt with SQL. Now, ColdFusion introduced ORM in ColdFusion 9 tons of years ago, and it was an abstraction to Hibernate and then following the JPA standards for Java persistence. Now, almost everything in Hibernate works in CF. There's a few limitations. If you are working with Adobe ColdFusion, and I'm just going to mention the latest ones, 2016, you're going to be working with Hibernate 4. If you're in Adobe 2018, you're going to be working with Hibernate 5. And if you're on Lucy, unfortunately, you're going to be working with Hibernate 3. So someday, if they care, they will basically upgrade to Hibernate 5, but don't hold your breath on that one. I have been holding my breath for almost 2 years. Benefits. Well, you're going to write less boilerplate, boring SQL. We have found an increase in productivity, usually 40% because you don't have to be writing the same SQL over and over and over again. Rich object models. That's very important if you're moving into more about object-oriented approach for your applications. You can actually deliver database patching updates. You even have, we have a module that Eric Peterson wrote called migrations that you can even tap into. So it gives you this increased flexibility and of course, database vendor abstraction. If you need to build products, like if you're building something like ContentBox CMS or Precise CMS, there are benefits because you don't have to worry so much about specific database intricacies. And of course, object orientation instead of traditional queries. However, you know, some people might say, well, what about Quick? Well, Quick is a ColdBox ORM. The lead developer is Eric Peterson. It was developed because Hibernate is not easy. There are some error messages that will actually help you lose weight or hair or even life. And we really have to wait on vendors. You know, you saw that right now in Lucy, we're still waiting for a Hibernate 5 update. They're on Hibernate 3, which is ridiculously old, but there's nothing we can do, you know, so good luck. So that's why we want to support more engines. So that's where Quick was born. And we'll continue to support both ORM engines. Now, there might be some haters out there for ORM. It is true. There are haters. But we're going to demystify why people hate ORM. And come to some sanity with it. And this goes for any ORM tool. The reality is that ORM is not a silver bullet. Okay, this is just another tool in your arsenal. There are times that you need the power of the database, reporting, legacy migrations, imports, exports, batching, store procedures, but you can mix and match. You know, there is no reason why you should not match. And that is the best approach, is to consider what the ORM tool is for and what the database is for. Now, there are also ways to do arrays of structs or lists in the ORM tools. You don't have to stick to the full object graphs and retrieving objects. So there are options, but they're not very easily exposed through the traditional ColdFusion ORM functions. There are ways to extract them, and we'll go through them. Now, there is a learning curve, okay? In my opinion, it is totally worth the investment to move into an object relational mapper, okay? This might be in any language, okay? Whether it's JavaScript, whether it's Clojure, whether it's Java, it doesn't really matter. Whatever language you're on, an ORM is always a great tool to have. You might be asking, well, where do I start? Well, there are several books that I would recommend. ColdFusion ORM book by John Wish is an excellent book. I actually I use it all the time for reference. Then the Hibernate Bibles, because they're not really books, they're like Bibles. It's another great resource. And I'll point out several good resources later on when I go into demo modes that I have found through time that I have found very beneficial for me. So to delve into ORM land, I think it's important to understand a little bit of the architecture. And I think that's where people or haters kind of lose it, is because they may just try it and they don't go in depth into the whole architecture of an ORM engine. In the ORM, you have your CFML engine, and you will have your CFML application, of course, that will have your entities. Your entities are then going to be mapped by Hibernate, okay? You're going to have a configuration. This is built on the fly by ColdFusion, or you can actually have your own. You don't have to allow ColdFusion to build the Hibernate file for you. You can use very fancy tools in Eclipse that can actually model all these things. You can actually grab an existing database in Eclipse, and it will actually create a Hibernate configuration file for you. There are many, many, many tools. But ultimately, this is how it would look. Your CFM application, your persistent entities that it will work through Hibernate and then basically persist into the database. Activating the ORM is actually quite easy. You can find all the information in CFDocs, ORM settings. It's controlled by the application.cfc. It can look something like this. The ORM settings, you have a CFC location where you dictate where your persistent models are. This is a point of failure that I've seen a lot where haters come in, is that sometimes the CF location is not defined. And what this means is that ColdFusion will actually scan every single object in your web root in order to find persistent entities. And your application is going to take forever to load. So first point is CFC location, be very specific. Very, very specific. Then dialects. If you do not put a dialect, then you're telling Hibernate to actually try to figure it out for you. It takes time. So put a dialect. The more that you tell Hibernate how to work, the better. You don't want it to assume certain things. Then DB creation is a nice little tool. You can use update, which means that it will compare your entities to the database and it will try to match them. It is great for delivering patches, but it's also a performance hit because it has to evaluate what's in the database and what is in your entities. So you can maybe put that to none, or in development, sometimes it's great when you're starting with a project to do drop and create, which actually on every ORM reload, it will drop the database and recreate them. It's a great way for you to actually start a project as well. Then we go into caching. You can have a secondary cache layer with a different cache provider. That's more of the advanced area, so you can do with caching in the ORM. We're just going to talk about the first level cache. Log SQL, really important. Always turn it on to true for development if you really want to figure out what the heck the ORM is doing. If not, it will be almost impossible to figure things out. So put it to true. Then we get into session management. Another point for the haters. The actual defaults for the ColdFusion engine suck. They're really bad. I don't know who made them at those decisions, but they're not good. So we're going to go through them. But the session management, which is how Hibernate actually sends data back into the database, in my opinion, should be controlled manually by you. Okay, so that's why we put flush at request end false and auto manage the session to false. We want more control, and that's where cborm kicks in. Then event handling is enabled by default with cborm. It just allows you to have a nice listener event-driven architecture available to you, which maps really nicely to callbox interceptors. So that's why you see there for event handling. And then you can skip CFCs with errors. We have it for false in development because we deal with multiple engines. That's another great debugging tool because if there are CFCs that actually have exceptions, you want to know about them. So you can turn that on to true, and if there's an exception on any of the CFC entities that you're dealing with, it'll tell you. Okay, and there are many other debugging settings that I'm not going through today, but maybe we should do another webinar on debugging ORM to help you alleviate of some headaches that we've seen. So with that said, there are the bad engine defaults. Really, really important to know about them. Do not use engine defaults. You want to control the way that data is flushed and the way that you can create transactions. This has always been the case for SQL, so always make sure that they're false. And control the database dialects. Really, really goes a long way if you can actually mark the dialect instead of letting Hibernate figure it out for you. All right, CFC locations, use it to very specific directories, or you pay the price of discovery. I mean, it is considerable if you don't set it up. Log SQL, great for debugging, really bad for production, right? So another piece for the haters, if you actually leave log SQL as true, it will actually log every single SQL into the log files. It will grow huge, very unperformant. So for production, make sure it is false, right? Now, save mapping has saved me 1,000 million times. I cannot express it so much. That little setting where it says save mapping equals true will actually create the Hibernate MXML file for you that actually represents what ColdFusion does dynamically for you. You can actually see how ColdFusion creates the mappings for you. And if you want, you can actually leave them there and actually fine tune them as you see fit. And you can actually explore Hibernate features that are available from the traditional annotations that ColdFusion has given us. So really, really nice setting. And we actually created a product out of this. It's called Data Boss. And we actually released a new version yesterday. And hopefully we'll have time. I'll give you a sneak peek. And we're going to create another webinar on Data Boss. And we mostly created it to facilitate the creation of apps with ORM. Right? You create one entity, you go to Data Boss, you inspect it. It'll actually create an admin for you. You can verify that what you're creating actually works, that data can actually be loaded, that it unloaded, that you can actually delete stuff. So it brings you the entire gamut of working with the ORM so you can do your work easier. All right, object-oriented modeling is key. If you're going to start working with any ORM, you have to remember that object orientation is required. Okay? UML is going to be your best friend. Stop thinking about data. You're not modeling the database anymore. You're modeling an entire object graph system. And that, to me, was the biggest thing because I used to do a lot of database programming. I used to call myself a database guru at that time. And moving from databases into an object-oriented world with objects was really difficult for me. I really had to hit the books, and until I understood that I had to stop thinking about data, I think is when I really flowed into working with an ORM. UML, like I said, really fantastic tool. It's great before you start a project. You can actually just sit on a board with your team and design. And you can actually look at all the entities that you want to build, how they're going to be related. You know, you can mark them with relationships. You can create comments. And it's just an essential way to start a project because you're not really caring about persistence. The reality is you should not care about persistence. I can use MySQL. I can use MariaDB. I can use Microsoft SQL. You know, I can use an NoSQL database. I really should not care about the intricacies of the database. At the end of the day, they are just for persistence, right? What I should worry about is actually how my objects are going to be related, what functionality am I going to have, and how is it going to help my project. All right, so the modeling is key. Remember, a query is just data. An object is data plus behavior. One of the biggest things for me that clicked and helped me start with ORM. Now, once that's done, another important aspect to working with specifically Hibernate is to understand the Hibernate session. This is not the same as the session scope. This is an internal Hibernate object that's called the Hibernate session. It's a transitionary space, or what they call the first level cache. Every time that you do entity load and entity new, they are not placed there, okay? They are actually, entity load will work into the transitionary space, but entity new will not, okay? That's another big difference that you have to understand in ColdFusion ORM. Now, second point is that you need to control when to send the data to the database. Remember the SQL days, same way. You can create a transaction and demarcate, and that will send things into the database. Hibernate offers you the ability to do an ORM flush, which means take whatever's in that space and send it to the database, okay, without a transaction. That's if you're not using transactions. And you can interact with the Hibernate session. There's a few functions that ColdFusion gives you. There's actually 1,000 more, but ColdFusion just gives you a little bit. We've exposed pretty much all of them in the cborm project. I like pictures. I learn better when I see pictures. So let's look at a picture. So here is a way to understand the Hibernate session. And I don't know if I have a pointer here. Let me see if I have maybe a way to annotate here. So let's see here. Does this work? Can you guys see the blue line? Just put it in the chat. All right, awesome. So when you create an entity new, the entity actually is just like a create object. It actually is not in the Hibernate space at all. It actually is in the ColdFusion memory space. When you actually get something from the database and you do an entity load or a query or something, then that conversation goes into the Hibernate session and your entities are going to be placed there as a first level cache. I'm not going to talk about the second level cache at this point. So this Hibernate session can live multiple times in a single request. Okay, it's basically a conversation. You can consider this as a conversation that you're going to have with the database. There's always a session factory which lives only once. It's a singleton, and it lives for the entire lifespan of your ColdFusion application. The Hibernate session factory has tons of features and information. We actually expose a lot of them in cborm as well. But let's focus on the session. So when we start a conversation, you do an entity load, then all these objects are going to be moved into the Hibernate session, right? And then when you do CRUD operations on those entities, they're not immediately sent to the database. They are batched, okay? So Hibernate tries to be performant, and it looks at all the different transactions, and then when the transaction is over or you flush it, then it tries to actually send everything into the database. Okay? Do my drawings. All right, so entity load, we'll put everything there. The batch SQL is going to happen when the transaction finalizes or you do an ORM flush. Many, many tools to clear the session, see what's inside of the session, get session statistics, etc. So it's important to understand that a Hibernate session models a conversation or a demarcation of you working with the database. All right. Another important thing is that word that I've said, transaction demarcation. And this really is important not only for an ORM, for anything that deals with SQL. You have to demarcate your SQL boundaries. Okay, this is important, or I would say imperative, for any ORM and SQL application, because no communication to the database should occur without a transaction. You have to be always reactive and expecting the worst. So CF transactions or native Hibernate transactions should be the way to go. You can have nested transactions in ColdFusion. You can have named transactions in ColdFusion. It really is important to use a transaction demarcation. And in this transaction theory, any existing ORM session is flushed and then reused. So when that transaction is closed, then all that data gets committed into the database, but you can also roll back, Okay, if you actually execute an ORM flush within a transaction, it is actually ignored because the Hibernate says, hey, I'm in a transaction, I can't flush right now. So important to use these transactions whenever you're working with really anything that goes into a persistence layer. All right. Another important factor is that working with ORM without relationships is actually very easy. Once you start working with relationships, then everything becomes very difficult. All right. Here's just some of the relationships that Hibernate supports. You know, one-to-one, where a student can have metadata, or you can have one-to-many, where a student can have many addresses. Many-to-one, where a user can have a role. Many-to-many, where your user can have many permissions. So different types of relationships. Now, these relationships also can be defined as unidirectional or bidirectional. What that means is that in unidirectional, a student might know about its addresses, but the addresses might not know about the student. Okay, and that makes it really easy to work with. When you start working with bidirectional relationships, things get very difficult. Okay, because first of all, the ORM does not know which one is the controlling factor. If I insert an address, am I going to insert also a student? If I insert a student, am I going to also insert the addresses? So you have to be very specific when you define relationships to make sure that the ORM understands how to persist them, how to load them, and how to work with them. The collections, so that means that relationships that have one or more objects can also be defined as arrays, or it can actually be defined as structures, okay? And there are many, many ways to put them together, but arrays are usually the easiest to work with. Structs do have their place. I've used them before, and they're really cool because you can create a struct of IDs of all the things that you have available within those objects. You can also have filtered collections, so you can put like where statements on those different relationships. You can control when they are loaded, which is really, really important. You can even control how many are loaded at a certain time. Another point for the haters there. And there really is a ton of configuration attributes for dealing with relationships. In my opinion, that is the hardest part of ORM, dealing with relationships. So I'll leave you with a few pointers that I've learned through working with Hibernate. And it's basically focusing on relationships. By default, all operations occur for relationships as immediate fetching. That means that it will do at most 2 SQL calls, one for the actual entity, then for the relationship, with a left outer join. It is the poor performance, right? I would say, and I would recommend to use lazy for all relationships, no matter what ORM you have, unless you have very specific use cases. If not, you pay the price, right? And in Hibernate, it offers 3 types of laziness. When you say lazy equals true, that applies for all relationships. And it basically will load all the relationship data when called upon. That means when you retrieve it, like with a getter, get something. And there's also this feature in Hibernate that some people might not know, that there are batches. So that means that those relationships can be batched in different bulks. So it doesn't have to be loading every single relationship in one time. Okay? There's also an extra step that's called lazy extra that only applies to one-to-many or many-to-many. It will actually create all the objects that are related to that entity, but it will create proxy objects. And the only thing that it's going to put in those proxy objects is the primary keys. And also those can be batched. That has different use cases as well. And then you can also have lazy equals proxy, which in all reality, that can only be used for one-to-one or many-to-one. And it basically just loads the same proxy with a primary key. So it's kind of the same as extra, but it only applies to one-to-one or many-to-one. Okay? In some cases, you might want your user to have all their permissions already loaded in one shot. That might be a case where you don't do lazy, but you leave it as immediate fetching. Okay? So there are many use cases for it. But you can control it. And this is the important fact. Mostly what I've used for eager fetching has been in one-to-one or many-to-one relationships. By default, it uses 2 SQL queries. Okay, like I said, poor performance. But if you put a fetch join, you can actually consolidate it into a single query, and it will be much faster. Okay. Batch fetching, that also limits the way relationships are loaded. Hibernate by default tries to load all the records at one time. You might not want that. You might want to batch them. you can actually put a batch size on that relationship and say, load me 10 at a time in my SQL. Okay. You can also do it at the entity level, so the entity can be demarcated with that batch size. So few things just to help you with it. One important tip, if you're in Oracle, the JDBC fetch sizes are actually defaulted to 10, which sucks. So it can be very slow for many records or batch operations. So you can do this very, very easily by just adding a custom setting. This can be in your property files for Hibernate. It's all documented on the not specifically that one, but how to actually add custom Hibernate settings. But you can increase the JDBC fetch size to 100, or you can do it at the JDBC driver. Okay, so important tip when we're working with Oracle. All right, so that is the introduction. Hopefully, some of the haters want to take a look back about ColdFusion ORM. And now it's time for cborm, which this picture actually comes from the Joel Watson days that he used to help a lot with cborm, where he said that the cborm was way cooler than a dinosaur riding a shark shooting a laser. So we found a picture of a dinosaur riding a shark and shooting a laser. So let me see if there's any questions before I delve into cborm. Oh man, ColdFusion ORM book is dead? Oh, account suspended. No! We're gonna have to talk to John Wish. All right, if not, I'll continue. All right, so cborm. So cborm is a module for ColdBox applications. And it was really created because of the capabilities of the ColdFusion ORM that are offered to us by the vendors are really limited. They're very rigid, and they're not very dynamic, and they really do not expose a slew of features from Hibernate. So we really wanted a pleasurable way to work with ORM. We wanted to take advantage of making it fluent, to take advantage of the dynamic nature of ColdFusion. We wanted to expose a lot of the cool features in Hibernate and ultimately make ORM not suck. Okay. If you can help, you can help me speak to the vendors so they can actually try to expose more things into Hibernate, because they're really just touching the surface at this point. So we've added tons of features throughout time. cborm is not new. It's been around for a long, long time. It gives you the capability to have service layers created for you dynamically, so you don't actually have to have a service. It will create one for you. You can actually have virtual service layers that are attached to specific entities. You can also have an active entity, which is basically our implementation of active record for ORM. This is really nice. And if you're working with quick ORM as well, it also implements active record. So you could, if you have an active entity application and want to move into quick, it's actually very easy, right? Then it allows you to do fluent and object-oriented queries. Automatic transaction demarcation, we talked about the importance of it, so it actually does it for you. You don't have to be doing any type of transaction, and it will do it for you for the majority of the save and delete operations. It has a very nice approach to working with dynamic finders and counters to create this nice, expressive, and fluent shortcut to SQL. This, I cannot say that I created it, but I actually blatantly stole it from cborm, which is the ORM for Grails. Grails actually inspired a lot of things in cborm a long time ago. Automatic Java casting. Now that we're dealing natively with Hibernate, of course, we need to deal with Java, but we want to make it really easy for ColdFusion developers, so you don't have to worry about Java casting. We do entity population, so you can actually populate your entities from JSON, from structs, from XML, even from queries, and it will build all the relationships. So if you adhere to the conventions of defining relationships, it will actually build the entire object graph for you from a traditional struct or JSON or XML. Okay. Entity validation, is available to you, especially for active entities, via CV validation. And in cborm 2, we included Mementifier, which is a module to actually extract the state of entities, and that state can be used to create JSON APIs. It can be used for auditing. It can be really used for whatever you like to transform the object graph into real data. So that allows you to actually, out of the box with cborm, have the ability to create JSON APIs from your ORM objects really, really easily. We've also added streams, so you can actually represent your queries into streams, which are based on the CB Streams project. So you can actually work with those Java stream collections as you see fit. And you have a lot more capabilities to working with those collections. So I'll go into a few examples and then what is included in the cborm module, and also discuss all the different changes we did for cborm 2 and its roadmap. So here's an example of working with cborm. So you can see here in my annotations that I can, I'm working with active entity here, so I can create a new book, and then I can use a dynamic finder and say, okay, give me a book by title. And then I can pass in the title of the book. And then it's gonna try to do and retrieve that object by that title. You can also say get or fail by a specific ID. So if the ID number 2 doesn't exist in the database, it will actually throw an exception. Or if it finds it, it will retrieve the book for you. Okay. You can see also here that I can do a more expressive completion for a deletion. So I can say give me or fail for ID number 4. And if I retrieve it, then delete it. Okay. I can also do delete wheres. So this will do kind of like delete where statements. So I can say delete this book where, and then pass in the criteria where active equals false and is published equals false. And this will actually use HQL in the background to actually do these in bulk. Okay. If we look at a service approach, I can see I have a user service here, and I can say user service count where, and give me a count where the criteria, age equals 20 and is active equals true. Or I can use the dynamic finders and I say user service, give me find all. So in this case, I use the word all. So that means retrieve an array by last login between. So I can actually say, find me all the users where the last login property is between this date and this date. And you can concatenate as many finders as you want, and we'll go through them as well. So it gives you a nice little expressive approach to finding your data. Then we get into criteria, what I call criteria heaven. Criteria queries have existed in Hibernate since the Hibernate 2 days. Now they're actually called JPA queries, but in Hibernate 5. But they allow you a very expressive, nice approach to creating your SQL instead of writing HQL. So you can say in this example, user service, give me a new criteria builder. I want to look for a property name inside of my user that matches the name Luis, is active, must be true, and then try to retrieve it or fail. I can do another one here. I can say is active equals true. Now give me a join. So here I'm gonna do an actual join to an association in my user object. So I can join to role, and then I can look at the name of the role and say, give me the admin role, and then return this to me as a stream and list it out. And that will give me a Java stream of the query it will represent. Here's another one. I can say, give me a criteria, and now I'm gonna create a projection. So this is something very cool that Hibernate offers. A projection basically is, instead of me retrieving arrays of objects, I'm gonna retrieve whatever I want. That's basically, you're controlling the select area. So in this case, I want a projection of properties. So I can say, give me an ID, give me the first name, and I'm gonna alias it to first name instead of F name. That colon demarcates an alias. And then L name, alias, last name, and then the age. And then I'm gonna say the where statement, I want all the users to be true, inactive, and I want all the roles to be admin. And then I want you to give me a struct, okay, of these guys, and then list it out. And that way, boom, I can have the ability to do arrays of structs instead of arrays of objects. It is extremely fast. It is probably 2 or 3 times faster than CF Query because you don't have to build query objects. You just build native structures. So super, super fast, very expressive, a nice way to work with the ORM, right? So this is just a small taste of starting to work with the cborm. All right, let me get rid of the annotations and move forward. All right, so what do you get with the ORM module? So with the ORM module, you're gonna get a base ORM service, okay? And this is kind of the central piece and central focus you're gonna be working with, and it's like an abstraction layer to the ORM. Then you have the virtual ORM service, which inherits from the base ORM, and then you have an active entity, which inherits from the virtual ORM. So it's this nice object graph for you to be able to work with the ORM in a very nice way. On the right-hand side, you see some utilities. You have the entity populators that allow you to work with entity population. You have the CB validation approach as well, and you have event handling for doing dependency injection and even AOP on those entities. Now let's start with the base ORM service. Actually, yeah, maybe I'm going to go through some of the features in the cborm, and then I'm going to go through the different stuff that we did with cborm 2. So cborm, the base ORM service, it's a service layer that we have created for you that you can work with any entity in your system. You can use all of its functions for caching, transaction, dynamic finders, getters, counters. You can get object metadata. You can actually talk to the session. You can talk to the session factory. And it really is what we call the 90% foundation. So it can actually take you 90% of the way when building your applications with all the different CRUD applications that you want to do and all the queries that you could possibly do. You could probably do it 90% of the way. Tons of methods. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go through all the new stuff that we added in cborm 2 in a little bit. But you have the ability to do counts, to count wheres. You have the ability to do delete all, delete by ID, delete by query. You can do evictions from the first level cache, eviction from the secondary cache. You can actually do HQL queries in a nice way. You can do existent checks. You can do dynamic finders. You can do getters. And the difference between finders and getters is that getters usually deal with primary keys. So you can say get, getter fail, get all. You can actually get information about your entity. You can say, give me the key value. So that means give me the primary key, give me the primary key value, give me the property names, give me the session statistics about this entity, give me the table name it represents, and much more. You can clear, merge, or create new entities off of it. You can do populations, and of course, saving. So lots and lots of different things that you can do with the base ORM services. The virtual services is inheriting from the base service, and instead of working with any entity in your system, you're basically routing a virtual entity to a specific entity. So that means that instead of passing always the entity name into the base ORM service, you're going to create a virtual service layer. So for example, you can create a user service that inherits from the virtual entity service, and you bind it to that user entity. Then, now you're in business. You can work a little bit nicer without passing all the entity names. And then you can even build that extra 10% that we're missing and create your own objects. So you can create your own concrete services that inherit from the virtual entity services, and you can start creating just like you would traditional service layers. However, if you like Active Record, you can have Active Entity. And the whole focus of Active Entity is to give you that approach. If you come from an Eloquent background, or you're coming from a Ruby on Rails background, you will feel very at home. Okay, it basically works on the fact that you're going to be dealing with the entity, and the entity knows how to save itself, how to find other entities, how to list other entities, and how to delete entities. So you're always working with that specific object. Very sweet validation integration, and of course you can do dependency injection and even AOP if you need to. So a very nice way for you to work with Active Entity as well. We discussed about the utilities that are available to you. Okay, so you have the population, which is really, really useful. You also have server-side validation for your entities via CB validation, dependency injection, and of course, event handling. And we'll discuss a little bit as we progress. I'm going to focus a little bit on the dynamic finders. We've done a lot of work on this one, especially on CB2. It really makes it expressive programming. There's 3 types of dynamic finders or counters. You have find by, which finds one entity, find all by, which finds one or more entities, and count by, which gives you a count. You can see some examples below. Let me get my annotation tool here. You can see here, I can say find by last name. I can say find all by last name like. I can say find all by last login between, last login greater than, and last name like. So you can use ands and ors. And you can say count by last login greater than and last name like. So it can become a really expressive function for you to actually find out some information about the database. Okay. So you can use all these conditionals that we've provided for you. Less than equals, less than, greater than equals, greater than, like, equal, not equal, is null, is not null, between, in list, not in list. And then you can have an and or an or operator. And then you can even pass query options available to you. And actually, we added a few more options, such as streams and structs in CB2. So lots of great stuff to create these nice expressive finders that you can use. ORM events are huge. You can actually now listen to everything that's happening inside of the ORM, and the cborm function will actually rebroadcast all the actual events from Hibernate into ColdBox. So the CFORM has one event handler available to you, and we will rebroadcast all those events into ColdBox interception chains. So very nice way for you to listen with multiple CFCs, anything that's going on inside of the ORM. Oops, I left some glasses there. Okay. I just documented here what are the listeners that we have and what do we actually rebroadcast, and all this is in the docs as well. All right, let me see if there's any questions before I delve a little bit into criteria queries, and then I want to leave you off with some examples. Right, I don't see a lot of questions. Right, move on. All right, so before I give you some of the demos that I've prepared and a lot of learning tools, I want to go a little bit deeper into the criteria builders, which are what we call awesome object-oriented queries, much nicer than that dinosaur riding that shark, shooting an Uzi, and with a dynamite stick. And a unicorn somewhere there. All right, criteria builder. So we know the limitations of ColdFusion ORM. Entity load has very limited features. You'll also have query execute and ORM query execute. Some operations, you always retrieve an entity, and you don't want that. What if you want arrays or arrays of structs or actually streams? Complex relationships are hard to query. And really, you go back to the SQL, HQL string building days, where you have a lot of if statements, you're concatenating SQL, and it just looks nasty. It's very error prone. Most likely, you're never unit testing it, and it's not fun anymore, right? So we really wanted to bring fun back into queries. So in the criteria builder, especially in CB2, we really focused on how it looked. A really rich set of criteria to create this DSL builder, but that's very fluent and human. It allows you to do projections and result transformation, so you can actually get results in different formats. It will allow you to do subqueries, so you can actually follow the path of SQL as well, so you can get very complex if you need to. Caching provided out of the box for you, and the most important part, SQL inspection and debugging. You can actually produce the exact SQL that you want now, and you can even take that into your database tool and actually execute the SQL. So you can actually verify things very, very easily. with the criteria builders, okay? So in CB2, we arranged it so it could look something like this. You can get a new criteria and say, give me that property of user name to be Luis. If it's active, get it or fail. You can see the join there as a stream, and you can see the projections there to retrieve as a struct. So many, many different ways. How it works, you start off by requesting a new criteria. You're gonna add restrictions into that criteria. So it could be something like find all the cars sold between April and July, whatever where statements you want, or subqueries. You can add different modifiers, so how that query is gonna actually behave, and then you can give the results or even counts of what you want. Restrictions, tons of them available to you, very expressive, from not equals to is null to is empty, is in list, not is in list, is true, is false, ands, ors, nots, tons of them, okay? Hibernate really has all of them available to you. And of course, the most awesome one, I would say, is the SQL restriction. So there might be cases where you need the power of SQL, but you don't want to go build a nice SQL struct. You basically can focus and just create a SQL restriction and pass the exact SQL you want. And in CB2, we completely rewrote it to actually make it work with argument binding, automatic Java casting, and you can actually, you'll see the examples, it really is a lot better. So here's an example of criteria queries in CB2. Lots of cool features that we've added here that I'm going to show you here. You can see here, for example, I can create a new criteria, and we've introduced a when statement. And the when statement says, hey, I'm going to expect a Boolean variable here. And if that variable is true, then I'm going to execute this closure or lambda. Okay, so it says here, if the argument is published that it's passed as Boolean, then execute the closure. Closure receives the same criteria. So then I can say, okay, I know that I'm in the published block. So I'm going to say is published now. I'm going to add it into the criteria. And then I have another embedded when statement. And I can say, well, if this publish is actually true, then I'm going to add the published date to make sure that it's less than today. Or I'm going to make sure that the expired date is null or is greater than now. Okay. And then I'm going to make sure the password protection is just empty, right? And then I can continue with my another fluent when right here and say if show in search is not null, then add it in. And then another when that if the arguments.active is true, then add it in. And then I can get my listing. So the when operations are awesome. Thanks to Eric Peterson for inspiring us in this. But it allows us to have no if statements, okay? I don't have to be doing an if statement, opening it, joining it. I don't have to keep state, nothing. It becomes really fluent and functional. As you can see, there are no variables defined here, zero, okay? Never a variable is defined, okay? Let me remove the drawing here. Right, so here are the SQL restrictions, and this is where we made a tremendous leap in CB2. So in these SQL restrictions, you're actually basically applying a restriction or a where statement on specific properties. So I can say SQL is active equals true, which is easy, no problem there. But you can also say ID and pass in a positional value, and then you can pass in your array of positional values. Or you can say username here and first name like, and then you can pass in those arrays. But there might be cases where it can get very complex and you can pass in your types. So instead of actually passing an array of values, you can say an array of structs. And that struct can have the value you want and then the casting that you want specific to that database column. So you can say this type needs to be an integer, this type needs to be a Boolean, et cetera, et cetera. And all these are documented for you, but you have full access to do your own SQL restrictions as you see fit on specific properties or even more properties, okay? I've used it a lot because my SQL supports JSON support, so I can do all my JSON operations on specific properties right here in SQL restrictions. Another aspect important that we really wanted to focus on is helping you create joins, right? Not dealing with not nasty joins. So we have in CB2 the join to approach now to create joins very easily. You can just say, hey, I want to join to my specific relationship. Here's an alias for that relationship. And then you can use that alias in the different statements or restrictions following it. Okay. You can also get very specific. You can also say, hey, I want a with clause. So this is the on portion of your join. Well, in this example, I can say we're users, join to users, please, but the u.last name must be on M and then a like. So you can get very, very fancy. Okay. The criteria builder modifiers, we've increased them a lot in 2.0. We've added now the ability for you to actually cache specific criteria and even choose a region within your secondary cache for these. We also added the ability for you to do comments. And let me mark them here. Let me get my draw here. The comments actually allows you to produce inline comments. So when this is actually produced in your SQL log, you will actually see your comments there in the order that you put them. We also added the fetch size for the selection operations, offsets, max results, ordering, and our favorite for the CB2 is peek. You can actually peek into the criteria as it's being created. It's great for debugging purposes. So in here, I can say new criteria, add this restriction right here, but then I want to peek into the criteria and actually get the SQL at that state. Then I can do a when, I can do another equals, and then I could do another peek. So I could actually start peeking into the way that the criteria actually start composing the SQL for you. So peek is a great debugging tool. Query hints was also introduced in CB2. So here's where you can actually influence the explain plan in queries. So the majority, almost all of the relational databases allows you to have explain plans and different indexes to use. Now you can influence that. And you can actually say, hey, I want you to use this index and this index instead of anything else in this specific query. You can also retrieve read-only entities. If you actually just want a whole set of entities that nobody can modify or be dealing with the whole flush situation, just mark it with read-only and all the entities are going to be read-only. You can also have a timeout. You can actually say, hey, if these results don't come back in 10 seconds, then do something else, okay? And then, of course, the when statement, which is great for avoiding if statements. Right, then results. You can retrieve one object back or one struct or one value, or you can say get or fail as well. You can also do your list, which has different shortcuts for max, offset, timeouts, etc. And then you can also do counts on specific properties. Okay? Lots of stuff there available to you. I know I'm running out of time here, but the projections are really important, is where you can actually go beyond the traditional, retrieval of array of queries and actually retrieve, even mathematical operations. Lots of stuff that is documented on the new ORM book that I'll show you right now. You have things like restrictions here, like I want something between a specific balance, something in the department. You have projections for averages, maximums, etc. And I put also here the different debugging and logging capabilities that you have available for cborm. And before I show you all resources and stuff, we actually built a very big demo called Card Tracker Demo. This is up in ForgeBox. I'll take you through it, and I'll show you what you have available in order to learn about cborm. So let me close the presentation stuff now and just focus on code now. And where do you get stuff? So we'll start off with the documentation with here. The ColdBox ORM module, which is coldbox-orm.ortusbooks.com. This is where all the documentation exists, completely revamped for CB2, okay? And you can also, if you wanted CB1, it's now versioned as well. But we have completely revamped all our documentation here, and actually we're going to be releasing this as a book as well in the next few weeks. but it'll take you by the hand. It'll take you through, even basic CRUDs that we've created via services or active entity. We've created different applications for it. So we've created a CRUD demo available to you, which is a cborm basic CRUD that will take you through the guiding steps of working with simplified CRUD, whether it's through services or through active entity or active record, if that is your approach. Here's where you can find it, cborm-crud-demo in our Coldbox samples project. And it has all the different things that you can use for working with cborm. We've also added all the different documentation types for criteria builders that didn't exist before, the mementifier, and even property validation. So everything is documented now, in a different approach than we had in different years. Okay, and before I go into that, let me go into the card tracker demo. So the card tracker is a more complex application. Okay, you can find this in ForgeBox, and you can also find the source code in GitHub. Okay, you can see all the different instructions to helping you load it. I have it cloned right here, and what I'm gonna do is it's called Pink Unicorns Do Exist. That's the name of the repository, and it has a Docker Compose file that has a MySQL database. And it will create a MySQL database for you using Docker. And it has a card tracker SQL already prepared for you, so it'll pre-populate the database. So I can really just go in here and let me switch my shell here. On top here, I basically can just say Docker Compose up, and this will generate a MySQL 5.7 database for me. And did I put recreate? I did not put create. Oh, the horses. Force create. Nope. It is force recreate. All right. So it will recreate the container for me because I was testing it here. You can see here that I now created the database folder. It starts deploying MySQL into my folder. Okay. And then it will read actually my card tracker SQL, and it will load it into memory. Okay, so right now it's now deployed. It's now ready, and I can actually see if I can connect to it. Let's see if I can connect to it. And this is on port, what, 3307? 3307. Oh, it's still starting up. Did it too soon. All right, now it works, and here it is. It deployed my application with all my different cars, with colors and drivetrains and features, and everything's available for me in that MySQL database. Then I can install my dependencies, which I already did to save some time here, and I can just start the Lucy server in this case. This is just using Lucy. It was much easier to build this rather simply, but you can use it with Adobe if you want to. There's nothing Lucy specific here. Right, it'll build up my command box server for me, and it'll load up the card tracker demo for me. Once it loads, it's a little slow because Zoom always chunks it, but you can see here the welcome basically is allowing you to work with all the cborm services. Here's the UML diagram that was used to actually model all the different entities that you can find in the models ORM folder. Okay, and then you can start exploring. For example, you can start exploring the base ORM service, and you can see that just a little showcase here. This is now using ColdFusion syntax highlighting. This is a new project we released 2 days ago. It is now called the CB Code Highlight. You can find it in ForgeBox, and it will use actual Python pigments libraries created by Mr. Brad Wood to do syntax highlighting at the ColdFusion level. Really fast. Show you how to create a car, find a specific car, list different cars, and you can see that I'm also dumping out the mementos using mementifier of the actual objects that are represented in the queries. And you can start representing that in the code as well. You can start seeing how active entity works. Here is an active entity that's created for me, an active car. How I can create a car, very fluent. I can say, give me a new active car, populated with this information, then validate it or fail, and then save. Or I can update a car, same approach. I now can say get or fail an incoming ID, populate it from the request collection, validate it or fail it, or then save it. So really fluent, really nice way to work with CRUD as well. We then get into virtual entity services, concrete services, population, how to work with actual population, with relationships, validation, how do you actually can validate different things inside of your entities. Simple queries now moving into criteria builder, how you can actually do criteria queries. You can even see that we produce actually the SQL logs. So you can actually see the exact SQL that is being executed through those criteria queries, okay? This is an actual stream object, so you can actually see this actual stream. You can work with projections, so you can see that I can actually retrieve a specific number from that projection. You can also get arrays of structs in a nice readable format for different projections, how to work with joins, how to work with subqueries, and then we tease you with all the SQL logging that you can do working with this instead of trying to figure out what the heck Hibernate is doing. Right? So here's subqueries. So you can see select all from where the car ID is in that entire subquery. Okay. All right, so that's the pink unicorns do exist. You can find it in GitHub and you can find it in ForgeBox. Hopefully you can try it and start learning how to put these things together. And like I said, we also released a new version of DataBoss. And DataBoss in this case is a application that can help you work with ORM entities. This is actually how it looks like. It lists all the entities in my system. And I can actually visit an entity and I can see all the different entities loaded in the database. I can create a new record. So I can say write permissions. And I have full control over how the admin looks and the different controls that I have available here, all with validation as well. I can edit those records. I can see the collections if they have any collections. And it has a built-in API, so I can actually export all those permissions into JSON, or I can go into a specific entity and expose it as JSON as well. So it's all really available to you to work as an API if you wanted to. Okay? And it can do all kinds of complex relationships. So if I actually have a user here, you can see here the many-to-ones that I can work with. I can have a date picker for dates, date of birth. I can have time of birth here if I needed to. I can have different custom drop-downs if I wanted to. Different collections that I can work with. So these are many-to-manys. So if I wanted to add my write permission, I can just add my write permission into my user. I can add one-to-one relationships. And you can even expose the entire object as a nested, mementified JSON structure. So lots of cool things that you can do with DataBoss. You have access to all the ORM metadata, and it's localized in different languages for you. It just is a time saver when working with ORM objects. And right now, we're in the process of seeing how we can make this work with Quick. So that will be hopefully the next version. Got to get together with Eric and basically make sure that we can have the same metadata for Quick ORM, and then you're going to be able to use this for Quick ORM as well. Right. So I've talked a lot for a lot of hours, kind of hopefully give you an introduction into the power of cborm and what you can do with it. Like I said, there's tons of documentation now for this. You can explore all the different signatures, all the different service methods. We've arranged them by category. So you can start working with it if you actually wanted to work with convenience methods. You know, you have all these convenient methods now, different finders, different getters, session management, query management, tons of stuff. So hopefully this can give you some satisfaction of working with the ColdFusion ORM. And actually, Eric Peterson has done a great job of adding a lot of these features into Quick as well. And my hope is that one day the cborm module could talk to both. So it really wouldn't matter which ORM you're talking to, it can work and with the same API with either Quick or CB or ColdFusion ORM. But that's still a ways ahead, but it's in the roadmaps. All right, so now I'm going to focus into questions and kind of answer whatever I can. If not, hopefully Edgardo, once we finish this, can email everybody, some of the resources here that I've shown. And of course, hit us up in Slack, join the Box team. So if you actually go to Box team, boxteam.herokuapp.com, you can get into our Box team Slack. And of course, if there's anything, hit us up through Slack, through information messages, or whatever you need to get a hold of us. So I'm going to move to questions here. So let's see here. Eric is like a superhero. He totally is, man. He's awesome. Will ContentBox be upgraded to CBORM version 2? Yes, sir. So ContentBox is one of my next pieces to start working with. So yes. Is DataBox containerized? Well, it can be deployed as a module, as a ColdBox module, or a standalone ColdBox app. So it can. It really doesn't matter at all. I can provide a Docker file if needed. Are all the features in CBORM2 supported in Lucy's current Hibernate version? So yes, and that removed hair, or actually made my hair a lot grayer. But yes, it does. Like I said, updating CBORM, if you can see the release history here and what's new 2.0, one of the biggest or most difficult things to do was to make this work with 3 Hibernate engines. I think I documented somewhere here where they were. Let me see, maybe in the intro overview. I don't know where I put it, but basically it was a pain because Lucy 5, oh, here it is. Hibernate 3, 4, and 5. So I had to work with 3 different versions of Hibernate and to make all the features work. So it was really a pain, but right now all the test scenarios pass on all 3 Hibernate engines. Some of the new stuff in Hibernate 5 is kind of behind the scenes. So really, everything's available to you. So you wouldn't feel the difference. Yeah, you would think in Lucy that you're working with Hibernate 5, but you're really not. And most of the things are just internal bugs that are available. Performance, obviously, Hibernate 5 is 1,000 times faster. I can literally tell you that Hibernate 4 and 5 are extremely fast in comparison to Hibernate 3. So my Lucy unit tests take like, probably 15 seconds to execute, and Hibernate 4 and 5 take about 2. So. Don Bellamy, do you guys ever sleep? No idea how you put out so much code. We do, Don, but we're disciplined. Is there a quick how-to guide somewhere on how to get CBORM working in a non-CB app? No, because CBORM is for ColdBox. So we don't have anything or any guides for you to not work with ColdBox. So there's so many things that you lose if I try to make this a standalone thing. So no. You could try to get it working, but it won't be that easy. Let's say you create a complex criteria to retrieve some records with pagination, but you want to reuse a big part of the criteria to retrieve the total count. What is the proper way to reuse part of the criteria? I've done as follows, but I would like to know if there is a better way to duplicate it. Yes, you should not duplicate. So actually the criteria queries, and that's documented somewhere here, maybe in the getting started guide. I think I put them here. Let's see. Here. I'm not sure if it's here or not. Maybe in the results. Yeah, here. So there's a tip there that says basically you can call the count first and then the list. So the count will actually give you the actual count with pagination, but it won't do 2 SQL calls. So it's basically we'll reuse the SQL from the count and then the list. So that makes it really easy for you to work with. So you can call the count first and then call the list after, and you're going to reuse it. Good question. So just make sure you always count first, then listing. Oh, here it is, box team. Put some of the links there. Here's the pink unicorns, GitHub repo. And here's the book. So I want to add a few more things to this to the CBORM book. I'm gonna be adding on advanced features, how to deal with some of the Hibernate error messages that we've dealt through in the past, just to kind of help people, what happens with it, and then maybe a section on how to actually model relationships and model entities, and then probably that's when we're going to release the book in print format and downloadable format as well. So we'll probably just take some of the John wishes portions, and I'll actually ask John if he wants to kind of collaborate on that and add a section on just modeling. All right, any other questions before we end the recording? No more questions? Somebody give me one more question. Now, somebody asked about Content Box, and in all reality, we've been waiting to do some updates on Content Box because we've been getting the infrastructure ready. That means ColdBox and its modules. Because right now, the next version of Content Box will be detached, thanks to the Momentifier and all the CBORM stuff, so all the API stuff we've done. So we basically are preparing all the different tooling in order for the next iteration. Backwards compatibility with CBORM 1. Believe it or not, Saeed, it is a 95% compatible. I actually documented the incompatibilities right here. So very, very little incompatibilities. Obviously, this is a major release. We tried to stick to what CBORM 1 was, but there were a few differences, not many. So you can probably get up and running in 10 minutes. Or maybe nothing, because you might not do anything. When is the next CBORM class, and how advanced do you get in it? Well, in all reality, we've never done a CBORM class. We've done an ORM class that Jorge mentioned, but we have not done just something specific on CBORM, but I think we want to. So I think this is something that I'm going to be talking a little bit about the CBORM in the Las Vegas ColdBox from hero to superhero. Well, it's going to be using ORM entities in order to create the API, but that might be the first kind of introduction into working with CBORM, but it's a hands-on training. But a specific CBORM class is still not available, but I think we can do this now that we have the book completely, 100% complete. We're just adding more stuff to it, but I think it's something that I definitely want to do. All right, guys, I'm going to stop the recording just in case some people have more questions that they don't want to be in the recording.